cultural framing effect. That said, the hypothesis is that underneath there is something else. This something else has been almost totally neglected by science. It has not been totally neglected by philosophy and aesthetics. And if I have time, I'll show you a few examples of people who intuit the things that I am trying to rephrase now. But there's nothing original from a theoretical point of view in what I'm about to say. So the term aesthetic, my answer to your question is a big yes. I think we overemphasized a logocentric approach to everything. And of course, this stuff doesn't substitute language. We don't know to which extent language is related to the body. We don't know whether we invented a new syntax for language. People claim that we, by means of a genetic mutation, all of a sudden we were equipped with the gene of grammar. Steve Pinker described it in that terms. Or if we exapted the syntax of the motor system to put it, which I think it's more plausible as a scenario, to put it into the service of this new device that we evolved, language. So I think the body can tell us a lot more about our cognitive life, a lot more that transpired from the 50 years when logocentrism and classic cognitivism was at the center of the stage. The body strikes back.
First lady, then Paul, then Professor Katz, and then Ronnie. I'm sorry, we'll try to take as much, and then Ori later on. Okay? Please. If you can introduce just yourself.
Yes, I'm Ellen Spolsky from Maryland University. And I do a lot of research on literature and drama and publishing.
Can you speak up a little?
If you can just please stand and project your voice. I'm sorry, I'm going back to sound all the time.
I'm from Maryland University, and I do research on literature, drama, and cognition. And my interest is this. You emphasize completely correctly the priming effect. I mean, if you're a dancer, so you said the response is more intense.
Yes.
Now, but here's the problem. When we think of art, and we think what we're interested in is surprise, the things we're not prepared for. I just wondered what you have to say something about. Do you ever see that? Do you ever have a way of testing that?
Yeah, I think in a way I was trying implicitly to address your question in the very final slides of my talk. So when it sounds really funny in Italian, even more than in English, simulazione liberata sounds like Jerusalem, Gerusalemme liberata by Torquato Tasso. But surrendered from the burden of being alerted from the potential intrusiveness of the world. When you contemplate art, when you read a novel, in a way you are in a much safer haven, and that's why you allow yourself and you enable this mechanism to be driven at a lower threshold than in ordinary life. So that's one element that perhaps within this very peculiar take on aesthetics.
You're an experienced reader, an experienced art historian. I suppose people.
Well, here we are confronting. I'm not claiming that an experienced reader or a critic in literature has necessarily a better experience of Dostoevsky with respect to someone who opens Karamazov for the first time. That's not the point at stake. Certainly what we know from other domains, if you are an experienced radiologist, you scan an X-ray with your eyes in a very different way with respect to an MD undergraduate student, because you know where to look. And there is evidence that the same happens to art critics and people like me when they look at artworks. The way you explore the artwork with your eyes is very strongly influenced by your previous experience. Also, the question that you are asking yourself, that has been shown by Arbus in the 60s of last century already, when he was comparing the Nefertiti, how people scan the Nefertiti profile by addressing different questions. So we know that. I think that a big component of art is that it violates expectation, and that's why I'm not so happy with a recent approach and model that tells you that you can describe the brain in a word as a sort of device that is there to minimize surprise, to predict. It's true that we try the best we can to predict what is going to happen. So perception is basically a predictive enterprise. You don't want to be eaten by the lion. You want to be ahead of the lion in order to survive, just to tell you with a joke. But in art there's something different. So art is more powerful to the extent that it makes you look at things in a different way. A way you would have never thought before identifying that artwork. So probably this has much to do also with the power of art to trigger aspects of your past, of your identity, of your memories that are normally not so powerfully activated by more prosaic stimuli. But I mean, this is just a very trivial statement that has nothing to do with what I know about how the brain enters in the picture. I wouldn't know. But certainly, I mean, this is a very preliminary step into this.
I'm just hoping that liberation, the idea of liberating your mind means that you somehow can be open to surprises.
Yeah.
You know what Samir Zeki would throw in my maestro, il padre della neuroestetica, he would throw in a word at this point, ambiguity. And because he believes that the power of art is in giving you this ambiguity, that you are always trying to disambiguate the world in extracting meaning, but what art makes you face is ambiguity. And so gives you this power of being suspended between many possibilities.
Paul, please.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
I've got a booming voice. I've got a pedantic question which may have a follow-up question. It's about your research on the responses to the Latin characters, the Chinese characters, and the scribbles. You said that there was very little or almost negligible difference in sensory motor response to the Latin characters and the Chinese characters, and the subjects were all Italian speakers.
Yes.
I'm completely out of my depth here because you were speaking about alpha bands and things that I don't understand. But would you not expect there to be a difference in terms of a motor response of vocalization, potential vocalization of the Italian characters? Isn't it absent? I mean, maybe you were measuring different things, in other words.
Yes, exactly. What we think we were measuring is the activation of the motor representation of those graphic signs. So what we were measuring was the simulation of the gesture. And
that's
see,
a different system from vocalized, from the motor response of vocalization. Like when I see the letter A, I kind of internally vocalize it anyway. Maybe not always.
Yeah, well, let's put it in that way. The possibility to vocalize the Roman alphabet letter and the impossibility to vocalize the Chinese ideogram had no bearing in this particular type of activation of the motor system that we detected in that particular experiment. Yeah.
Ruth? Basically, if you can please stand up
I can do
and
that.
face a little bit of the audience.
Okay. While you were showing us David, this beautiful thing, you told us that when we are in the museum or in front of the museum or whatever, we are differently oriented to
Yes.
perceive and so on. So as you were talking about it, I thought of Bernese David. And in both cases, why is it that I would still say Michelangelo David is a better sculpture? Now, what I've learned from the old days while I was still a student of Maya Shapira, I mean, how you analyze this sort of thing. And, in fact, concerning action, now action, activation, and so on. In the case of David, Michelangelo, he hasn't thrown the stone yet.
Yeah.
He's potentially thrown. He's focusing, and just any minute he's going to do like that.
Yeah.
But in the case of Bernini, he's already there.
Yeah.
Right? Now, what would I expect, now coming to Mira, in the case of David, I know it's going to take place, anticipation, related to anticipation. In the case of Bernini, it's memory. I'm invoking memory, I know, because somebody's standing like this, he's going to straighten up. I mean, so it's potentially, it has less than David, than Michelangelo. But in terms of our experience,
Yeah.
of what we know about our bodies, we know it's going to just straighten up. Now, what I'm trying to say is that all the attempts to understand art, you know, all this experimentation, expectation, and in music or in sound and so on, how we go about employing both our memory
Yeah.
and our experiences, as well as our body sort of relation or pre-verbal. When we try to verbalize it, the verbalization in art history, in musicology and so on, is related to that experience which may be pre-verbal.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm talking to you and everybody who's using art generally. When you engage an artist and you say, what can I learn from this artist about mirror neurons and so on, I say, forget about it. Forget about it. You're not going to learn from the artist. You're going to learn from those who studied art, whether it's Gombrich, whether it's Minkowski, whether it's those, and concerning even philosophy, you're going to learn more about, doesn't matter whether Descartes writes and Dagi and so, you know, the dualism in Descartes or whatever it is, that these are the people really who gave it thought and made suggestions, and when you study it, it's a brain, it's a mind that approaches the brain. And then the conundrum between the two. So it is what happened to the mind can't be forgotten. What I'm saying in the humanities, how one saves the humanities.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if I can have a brief comment, I fully agree with you. I mean, the topic we are addressing with this approach is a philosophical or a theoretical topic. So I like to think that I think what we lack is a novel philosophy of nature, and I think cognitive neuroscience can give a huge contribution to a new philosophy of nature. And a philosophy of nature of mankind, of course, must start from the key issues that are being addressed by the humanities. So I don't think that in order to save the humanities, we should, in a way, have the humanities department buying fMRI scans. But I think what we need is to form new scholars that are familiar with both languages. So we need to have cognitive neuroscientists more familiar with the epistemological status of their work. Some people claim we don't need philosophy, forget about it, we're going to tell you how everything works. So these are the eliminativists, or I have a different word, but I will not define them. On the other hand, there are people in the humanities department, and I heard this remark many times, why should we bother with the brain? We have worked it all out by ourselves. So I think that by, as we were talking before, over coffee and cigarettes, Aby Warburg, during his stay in Florence, is reading, devouring a Darwin book on the expression of emotion in men and animals. And he wrote in his diary, finally a book that helps me. And he was heavily relying on notions put forward by former colleagues of mine, physiologists like Semon, like Herring, so the notion of schemata, the notion of engram, So it's hard to imagine Pathos Forman without the contribution that unconsciously he got from Darwin. I'm pretty sure about that. So this thing happened in the past, and they should keep happening in the future. So I think we should come up with the idea to have new master programs when you learn both cognitive neuroscience, philosophy, aesthetics, anthropology, sociology, in order to have scholars that probably won't be able to run an experiment by themselves, but they can tell a good experiment from a bad one because they know the basic, they know the language, and the other way around. And I think we are about to accomplish that in the near future. I'm quite optimistic.
We have the very last question, Ronnie. I think you were.
Well, one comment and one
If you
question.
please stand up and speak loud, please.
One comment or suggestion and one question. Do you think you can drive the results by just telling the observers that this picture was done by an artist and this by a computer? There is an analogous study done in music and it has very interesting results. So this is one.
No, I know. That's a very interesting suggestion. My wife is doing an experiment, but it's a behavioral one with paintings, famous paintings from Italian futurist painter Balla, Boccioni, and they are measuring the different aesthetic judgment of those paintings by presenting them with no title, with the original title, with a title which emphasizes the dynamic component and a totally unrelated title, and apparently they are spotting differences. It's purely at the behavioral level, no brain involved. So that's very interesting, yeah.
The question?
Well, a comment regarding the effect of art. I think one thing that should be taken into consideration is the fact that we focus on the sensual part and we sort of extract it from subconsciousness to consciousness because we are focusing on it. So we are savoring. We are really focusing on the thing and we are trying to get the maximum out of it. I think in this sense it's very different from what we do in real life. That we just need to extract the minimum information or the maximum information to go on. In art we do something else. And I think this should also be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, first of all, thank you to Professor Vanessa. We have made a strategic decision. Instead of now moving once out and in, since we also took part of the time of the break, we suggest to move directly to Mark Hansen and then take the break before we hear the artist, because we have an artist, I would say, a very distinguished artist here who agreed to be sort of the, how can I say, the object of our experiment, and therefore basically will be much more proper to have the break immediately after this second break. So Professor Van Hansen and Ada, you're introducing me. Paul, please.
Okay, chairs are hard to come by, so I'm going to stand here, move back to my chair, and then make a few comments, maybe later on. It gives me, while Mark is setting up, I'll verbalise. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mark Hansen, who is Professor of Literature and Arts of the Moving Image at Duke University. I think it's safe to say that Mark has been one of the most, well, in my opinion anyway, one of the most important theorists of the relationship between technicity, experience, and in particular, I think it's fair to say, digital media, digital culture. In particular, through two, I think, extraordinary works. First is New Philosophy for New Media, the second is Bodies and Code. Those are the two that stick out in my mind. I know that he's probably going to mention another project he's working on now. I think we should proceed with an anticipated round of applause. Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm very happy to be here, and I want to also thank Hava for. I've been excitedly telling all my friends that I'm going to this event. You know, not just to come to Jerusalem for the first time. My turn to go closer. Yeah, not only coming to Israel and Jerusalem for the first time, but really to participate in what I think is a kind of a novel event. To get together people from very different places who have lots of more shared ground than I had even thought so going into it. So I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to the rest of what will happen. I'm reading a paper, so I want to apologize for that, although you can thank my friends for keeping me awake so late last night that I couldn't finish it. So it'll be shorter, and I'll have to do a little improvisation at the end, which is good. So I'm also going to show you these slides, and I have 5 slides, and I'll just briefly explain them. They are tangentially related to, they're related to my new work, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm also just interested to put this out there on the table. These are some images of a DARPA project called Operational Neuroscience that takes people who are experts in reading satellite images, who've gone through a training period where their brains are forming in such a way that they become better than you or I at being able to spot interesting things within satellite images, like bomb-making facilities and so on. And so to operationalize their expertise, the military's figured out that they can hook these people up to a EEG thing and show them very rapid, breaking up the satellite images into small little images and flashing them in front of their eyes 10 per second, right? And they're interested then in, when the brain lights up in a certain way, right? That indicates there's something interesting in that image, right? So it's an operationalization of the brain that integrates the human into a larger cognitive network where consciousness and awareness and perception are completely left out of the picture, right? They don't ask these people, is there something interesting in there? They just read what happens in the brain. Okay, so I take this as a kind of figure in my book that I'm going to talk a little bit about for the position that contemporary data industries want to put people, right? They want to put us in a position of bypassing our consciousness and tapping directly into our behavioral signs or traces in order to market to us, in order to figure out what we like, and so on and so forth. Okay, my next images, and I'll just run through these and then I'm going to loop them. It's an image of some work by Etienne Jules Marais, who is a 19th century psychophysiologist turned artist. And I'm interested in Marais above all because he says his machines are not prostheses for the human mind or the human body. They actually have sensory domains of their own, right? So I'm interested in my work, I'm talking about a larger picture of sensibility than what sense perception gives us. And so I'm very interested in this claim, right, that these machines, and I would say these are not different than the kinds of machines that Professor Galese uses in his lab, these machines are actually having a sensation of something that the human cannot sense, right? They have an openness to a dimension of the sensory world that the human cannot sense. And they supplement human experience, but not as a prosthesis, not by expanding our sensory capacity, by giving us a different sensory capacity. Okay, so, and it also shows us that the line of thinking about technology that I'm exploring in my work dates back, has a prehistory, right? It's not something that just started with the invention of the computer. Okay, so these are just some images showing the laboratory setup of the brain time experiment, and I'm very interested in, I'm going to talk in my paper about the role of the laboratory setup in the phenomenon that are accessed through experiments. Okay, another image from Marais of a human walking. And then finally another image from the Operational Neuroscience project, where this is depicting a project to develop a helmet that a soldier would wear in the field. And the helmet would read, again, the soldier's brain and alert the soldier to areas of danger within his or her visual field before she becomes aware of it, right? So it's a kind of way of speeding up the access to the embodied dimensions, embodied simulation, right? The embodied dimensions of the perceptual field, right? So short-circuiting the loop that would give you a conscious awareness maybe half a second later and tapping into it more quickly. Okay. Is it okay if I sit or should I stand? Sit. Stand? Stand, sit, stand, sit. Stand. They say stand in the back. I'll stand. Both. Sit and stand. Okay. Okay. So essentially, my paper, Edwin just said to Professor Gallese that what was admirable was the clarity with which he presented these concepts, and I apologize for reading a paper because I always think it's less clear. But essentially what I'm saying is simply a reaction to my reading of Vittorio Gallese's paper on embodied simulation and some thoughts about how I would think of it in a kind of philosophical register, I guess, right? So, but I mean, the thing about shifting the terrain from an overly cognitive, linguistic focused approach to an embodied approach is really what I'm also interested in doing. So my paper is called The Technicity of Presence in Aesthetic Experience. Okay, I want to begin my talk today by engaging a point made by Professor Gallese in his paper on embodied simulation. Towards the end of his discussion of the role of